Button. So again, welcome to the class. My primary talent or skills in art is fast becoming bladesmithing. I am currently mentoring under Nicholas Cacilio up in Antir. So if you have any feedback, please feel free to reach out to him, or you can reach out to my knight here in Artemisia, which is Floki. And so let's get this show started. And so I'm going to start it with a question, and I'd like you guys to answer as best you can. Why do sources matter in the arts and sciences world? And why not? Why don't we just make something that looks cool?
I'll give that one a shot.
Thank you.
Okay. Um, I'm all about making things look cool, but as a nonprofit educational organization, one of our goals is supporting learning about medieval arts and trying to be as accurate as possible in doing so. And whereas sometimes we can have like the creative anachronism, and where you're kind of like maybe bridging gaps or doing experimental archaeology, accurate sources are very helpful and help support our 501(c)(3).
That's pretty much it. It Is there anybody else that has anything to add to that? Don't be shy. It's okay. There are no wrong answers.
I would
I was
say
going
that.
to, oh,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead. Go right ahead.
okay. I was going to say that it keeps us grounded in what in well, not our aspirations, but our enthusiasm. And if we want to go off the deep end, that just starts leading into a different hobby almost.
Yeah,
So
for sure. Go ahead, Johannes.
So I can just speak for myself.
Absolutely.
I want to create a more realistic persona. And so without those sources and the ability to learn that, then I'm just throwing a dart at the wall.
That's also fair. That's also fair. Anybody else?
I personally feel the arts and sciences are the heart of the SCA. And what I mean by that is it is kind of the thing that binds us all together, whether you're recreating a specific item, whether you're recreating martialite activities through views of chivalry, whether you are recreating the service, that you perceive somebody of that time period would do. I think it just really is the thing that binds us all together.
Hey, I am learning that as well. So those are all great examples. For me to add to it, I would say that yes, there is a lot of some fantasy aspects to the SCA. To a lot of us, though, the SCA is not necessarily a fantasy club. We all strive to, like Johanna said, we all strive to recreate our persona and do the best that we can to make it as period as possible because as I've been learning and I've been taught by several people, it kind of adds to those little teeny tiny magic moments that may only happen a fraction of a second but for that fraction of a second you feel like you are your persona. You are who you are trying to recreate and it genuinely feels like you are in that time period. And I feel like we can all relate to that that's what we all strive to do. And taking our documentation and our research serious and finding the truth behind those things uh, kind of adds to that. If we claim that something is historical, that claim carries weight. And it's kind of hard because as we all know, history and the sources and the documentation and the archaeology is always expanding and always changing. And so to say something is genuinely historic is hard to interpret and hard to prove essentially. And that's why documentation is important, especially if you're going to start competing. And especially I feel like if you become a peer, you should be setting the standard for those things. So I wanted to briefly talk a little bit about a couple of things. The difference between inspired by and based on. And a prime example for me is the sword that I displayed at Queen's Prize was an inspired by weapon based on a find that was in the British Museum. It's the Liutrit sword, which was it was actually a left-handed sword. Um, I wanted it to be based upon, but as I started creating it, I realized that my interpretations didn't exactly line up with a lot of people's who actually have seen the sword, have held the sword, have looked at the sword, and so that it changed it to based upon or inspired by that sword. So the difference between those two is something based upon an actual archaeological find is that it's you found the object, you recreated the object to the best of your abilities. And depending on the standard you hold yourself to, for me, it's personally like within grams of weight of said object. Um, Minute measurements from millimeters of width and thickness of the blade. Um, those are based on things. And I can't really explain other facets or other people's um, artistic talents like making garb out of my wheelhouse. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to kind of take what I say and apply it to your own craft. Inspired by though gives you it uses the aesthetic idea. It has a lot more loose interpretation. So if you miss the mark on this measurement or that measurement by a little bit, obviously it's going to be more inspired by. It also gives you a lot more personal creativity to add to the sword or the object that you're making. Based on is a specific time, a specific place, and specific evidence that you found that you're recreating, and you want to get it at, like I said, as close to the actual object found as possible. So when you're doing your ANS documentation, remember that those two things are not the same. If you say this is based on a 10th century Norwegian find, you must be able to show where that comes from, that is intellectual and honest. And so that's kind of where it goes back into my Liutrit sword. Could I have said it was based upon that sword? To certain standards, I believe I could, but knowing myself and how I want my work to be interpreted, I'm going to move forward and say it's inspired by that sword because there are many things, even though it's a very beautiful sword and I'm very proud of it, it's probably the most advanced thing I've made. I know that on the next one I'll do better, and eventually I will be able to put my name on based on versus the inspired by. So, is there any questions on that or anything that anybody wants to add? Please feel free. All right, perfect. So, as we move forward, we're going to talk about why practicality matters. And that kind of breaks down into four things for me: the respect for the past, respect for the community, stronger ANS projects, and personal growth. So, respect for the past, real people made these objects. These were their life. Unfortunately, our time now, we can't spend day after day recreating the things that we want to create, as they did, especially during like the winter. That's all they would work on is their projects. They lived, worked, fought, and built families. And personally, I think we owe them the accuracy when we claim to represent them. Because bad history flattens real cultures and into stereotypes. And what I mean by that is it's super easy to take an object that you love and put your own creative spin on it and say that it's from that in that time period. But realistically, is it? I would say now I like when I say that, it's kind of a it's hard to what are the words I'm looking for? It's a slippery slope because obviously, like I said, these people, they spent day after day, hour after hour honing their craft and doing what they did. And today's society, we cannot do that. We have 9 to 5 jobs or even more than that. We have families, we have real life that is different from that time period. And so maybe your skill set isn't quite up to par to those that were creating these things, but understanding that and understanding that what you use today, um, we'll say like a sewing machine, or for me, it's a 12-ton press. I use a press a lot. It makes work go a lot faster and a lot smoother. And I mean, I do have 2 sons that are getting ready to start forging, so that would probably be a little bit more historically accurate. But um, if you have these new objects, understanding the difference and putting that in your documentation. One thing that I love to do personally is add a table of understanding how they did it, how I did it, and why I did it differently. And I've got a lot of positive feedback from that. Um, so taking the extra time to recreate something, hand stitch something, create something from scratch, as I know a lot of people have done, and it's something that I aspire to do. It's a goal of mine to take raw iron ore and recreate an actual sword the way that they did it, even if it's just one time, and do it all by hand and just to really fully understand the scope of the talent that these individuals had in the past. That's what I mean by how we can represent them because you can fully understand just the level of skill that it took to recreate these objects. Yes, technology is awesome and technology is fun, and you can recreate very beautiful things. Um, and I will always use my press. I'm not frowning against that, but it kind of beautifies history to fully understand the hardships that they had to go through to create the most beautiful things that I've ever seen. Um, and that kind of ties into respect for the community. So when you teach a class or display an A&S project, other people will repeat what you say. They will use you as the example. If your foundation is weak and the error spreads, then it falls back on you. And I personally believe that eventually it will come back to you because there's speaking from my own experience, there's a lot more smarter people out there than I am, and they will find the chinks in your armor and your flaws in your documentation. And I would hope that they wouldn't necessarily call you out on it, but they would help guide you and teach you the right way. Um, Sorry for my voice. I'm getting over a cold. I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but so if that foundation is weak, and a one wrong assumption becomes a common belief, then everyone knows that that's an issue, or that everyone knows that isn't really. I'm trying to think of the words here. Everyone knows that is a very false or very weak statement, and you should not put that in your documentation. But if it becomes something, if you use it a lot, or if it becomes common knowledge, especially in my forte area, my art, there's not a whole lot of people that do do bladesmithing and blacksmithing. And so it's super easy. It would be super easy for us to get the wrong information and nobody would know it until later on. And we could base it off saying like, well, all the experts say, or everyone says. And as it spreads and spreads, it becomes nearly impossible to correct without really fundamentally changing and admitting your flaws and taking time to correct them. So that's how myths begin. And so it's super important for us to take our documentation and our studies very seriously and understand why we look at the rules that we do, or not the rules, the guidelines we do to make sure that we don't misinterpret anything, or we don't I mean, we're going to get stuff wrong, but acknowledging that when we get it wrong and taking a step further and saying, hey, I was actually wrong on that. Let me backtrack and tell you why. A For example, I made a Gladius for Kings Road 2 or 3 years ago, and um, it when I first started making the Gladius, that's a Roman sword. It's called a ricasso. It's about an inch space above where the hilt is, so the cross guard. Usually, in most modern weapons, there is a 1 inch space that has no bevel, no edge. And so when I made it to the best of my abilities. However, when I found out that it was incorrect, I asked the individual who owns it if I could have it back so I could actually or grind in the bevel all the way to the hilt, as all 99% of all historical weapons through the Roman era up into the late medieval periods had the blade go all the way to the hilt guard or the upper guard on your handle. So I asked them for it and I corrected it and I told them why. And it's just little things like that. As you learn and grow, that's how you become stronger as a artist and as a person. So that kind of leads us into number three, which is stronger A&S projects. When you're doing the A&S projects, and you're being judged, a few things that they look for that I know of is evidence, clarity, and traceability. So, so evidence is the evidence that you provided. Where did you get your evidence from? How did you get your evidence? Was it from, we'll go into this a little bit further, but was it from like a museum, or was it from a Wikipedia file, or was it from Joe Schmo down the street said, hey dude, I know a lot about Vikings. I've read a lot of books. This is what they made. Um, and then clarity, like is your documentation clear and precise? Is it easy to read? Does it really sound like you understand what you're talking about? And then traceability, can you trace it back? Um, can you see where it came from? Those are the kinds of things that they're looking for. A solid source base can give you confidence. So if you really study your source material and take the time to read through it, it will give you the confidence that you need to do things like teach this class or present your stuff at A&S competitions or at A&S displays. It also gives you a clear way to answer questions. And honestly, it gives you a little bit of protection against critique, which having a little bit of constructive criticism is good. It's good to be tested, I think. It's just like I'm also a fighter. So if I only have easy fights all the time, I'm never going to learn anything. But if somebody who has questions can come to me and kind of test me a little bit, it's good for me to expand on. So for such as when somebody asks, well, why did you do it this way? You can say because artifact X comes from site Y shows this, and then give the example and explain it, and it changes the tone of the conversation immediately from being tested to them listening and learning. Especially if you're competing at Kingdom Arts and Sciences, which I've been told the judging is pretty rigorous. I haven't competed there yet, but being crowned last year and watching what those contestants had to go through was pretty intense. And then the last one, it gives us personal growth, kind of tying it all in. It's going to help you as a creator to study these things. It's going to help you understand how they did it. It's going to give you more of appreciation of like Johannes when he said, I show up because I want to be as historically accurate as I can because that's how I want to be. I'm going to say displayed. That's how I want people to perceive me. Plus, it's something we all love and enjoy. So taking it just that one step further is going to help you fully understand what your persona may or may not have went through. It's going to help you really truthfully love and cherish what you're creating. It's going to exemplify the beauty of what you're creating. And even if you're good or bad, we all start somewhere. Just know that it really it gives me personally a deeper appreciation for all the arts and sciences because not only have I created some pretty amazing things, and I'm trying not to brag. It's humble brag. I'm proud of what I've done, but seeing what everybody else can do too is mind-boggling. And the sheer amount that goes into it, it really fundamentally changes how I view the SCA and how I view the arts and sciences. So taking it that step further and really fine-tuning your documentation will expand all of this, especially in your personal growth. Um, Good sourcing can teach you how to question assumptions, how to slow down, and how to separate preference from evidence. Um, and that skill carries into forging, sewing, fighting, and leadership. And I personally believe that the SCA needs a lot of leadership right now. So when you're going through these sources, it's good to question them, and it's good to look a little deeper at each one of them. It's And especially when you're looking at something that may be a little bit more oddball that you can't find a lot of documentation on, it really teaches you how to slow down and dig deeper into the excuse me, into the little nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of art and science. It's especially, I mean, in today's world with the power of the internet at our fingertips, there are some sources that are so locked down and it's so frustrating. We've all been there that we've been like, if I could just find this one damn book or this one damn paper, it would change everything. But you can never find that paper or that book. And if you do find that paper or that book, it's like $9 million. So it teaches you to slow down and kind of look at other various sources that may have used the source that you're looking for in their references. And it also shows you how to separate preference from evidence. There's certain materials that I would prefer to work with, but the evidence shows that they didn't use that kind of that. That's kind of what I'm talking about. So modern day source, I would say, would be like a 1070 high carbon steel. I know that probably means nothing to you guys, but in history they used the bloomery iron, and then they added carbon to it to make the high carbon, and then they forged it out into a sword. I'm sorry, I can't do those, but understanding that my preference is to use modern materials because it's easier to get my hands on, but the evidence is this. So it kind of teaches you, again, kind of understanding what they used, how they used it, why they used it, and it kind of that carries over to what you create. So, and like I said, that skill definitely carries over from all aspects of the SCA, taking time to slow down and really develop the patience that it takes to do good documentation. So, mhm. So let's just kind of dive into what makes a good source. Does anybody have anything when you Google something, how do you decide what to trust?
Uh, Obviously, a primary source is like the optimal source, but if you cannot find a primary source, I would say be really aware, cognizant of.
You cut out.
Can you guys hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Did I cut out? Maybe I cut out. Hang on.
You guys,
Because I could
Agnes.
continue to hear Jesse, and I can also hear Atilivs. So that's
Okay.
Okay, it was me. It was me. I think my headphones died. I'm sorry.
That's okay, no problem. I was just going to say that, if you can't find a primary source, which is really, like you said, it's so challenging and can cost a lot of money, or, those things are, you can't actually go and see them in real life because they're in Europe or whatever it might be. There are like online sources or library resources that are more. Some are more reliable than others. So just be aware of what your source, your secondary source to access those primary sources is. And it's not Chat GPT.
That's great. That is great. So how do you guys know what's a primary source and what's a secondary source?
Primary source is the actual item. It is something that you see in a museum. So, but this is where it starts to get slushy, if you will. So if it's a painting and I want to use it for costuming, is that a primary source or a secondary source? And if so, for what?
Ooh, I'm going to say secondary source because it's taking something, a painting is something that somebody interpreted, painted on an object, and then it is provided to us. It's not the actual object itself. So,
It would be a primary source, the painting itself, if you were painting, right? And
yes,
that was the art that you were specific in. But for somebody that's costuming, it could be a secondary source or a tertiary source, meaning because it is an interpretation from the artist itself. So it starts to get a little hazy in those areas. So I would say in the SCA, most of us use secondary and tertiary sources. I don't know how the rest of you guys feel about that, but in my experience, that's where all of our sources lie, unless you have the actual item, which is super cool if you do.
I will. I'll add to what you're saying, Cortland, and that is that if you have a preponderance of secondary sources that all point in the same direction, if they are,
Correct.
for example, if they are from period, but they're not actual primary sources or they're not the object, uh, you can sort of take that as enough evidence, like the same evidence as if it was a primary source.
agreed. For Grace, Sarah says, so would a manual from the time be a secondary source? And she also says peer-reviewed academic sources can be found through a lot of library programs. Depending on the object, I would say if it's a book that has evidence from that time period, or manuscripts or pictures or whatever, that I would say it's still a secondary source because you're taking somebody else's interpretation of it and not having the source in front of you. This is great. So let's talk about what most beginners assume. And I've fallen into this trap myself. If it's published, it must be true. If you get on Wikipedia, and that is I mean, it's a great place to get quote unquote started to get an idea. But if it's on there, it must be true. Unfortunately, Wikipedia is anybody can add to it at any given time. Anybody can edit it, so it's hard to use that as a primary source. If it has a lot of pictures, then it must be good as well. If it sounds confident, then it's correct. However, none of these are really reliable tests. You can get on Pinterest, and especially since we talked about or uh, AI was brought up briefly, you can pretty much make anything you want with AI photos and make it seem real. Or you can get on Pinterest and find pretty much anything you want and have that done, and kind of find any evidence that you want. However, if there's no documentation to back those things, then they're not reliable. Anybody can write something to sound confident and be confident so it sounds correct. However, that kind of falls back onto to what we were talking about before is if something sounds confident but it's wrong, that's how rumors start or myths start, and before you know it, you're neck deep in trying to correct what you have said. So what makes a good source? Traceability. A good source can be traced. Ask yourself this when you're doing your documentation. Does it cite where the information came from? Does it list artifact numbers if it's based on a museum find? Does it name the museum? Or does it reference an excavation of some sort? And then you continue to tell yourself, if I cannot follow the trail backwards, I really shouldn't rely on it. For example, this is a bad example. Viking swords were always pattern welded. That's not necessarily true. A lot of them were, yes. But uh, the better example would be artifact, and this isn't an actual find, so don't quote me on it. Artifact C1234 found at X site, dated in the 9th century, shows XYZ that these swords were pattern welded, or this particular sword was not pattern welded. If you can show your evidence and show where the evidence came from and trace it back, then that's a strong sign that your evidence is correct. And if you can actually take what they said, let's say they found the British Museum has reference R1234, and that takes you to the Leutrid sword that I used before. Then there you go. You can trace it back to what they're actually looking at and what they looked at, and kind of base your opinion on that. If they don't show those things, I would say proceed with caution. And just because they may not say that, you can find if you can find multiple documentation or multiple different sources that point the same way, as we were saying before, it may be true. Number two, specificity. Vague claims are very weak claims. You have bad source language. It is believed is a bad one. Most historians agree. They often used. You should ask yourself, who believes this? Which historians? How often? And based on what exactly? So those are the things you should be asking yourself, and then hopefully they cite their references so you can answer those questions. If you can't answer those questions, then it's probably not as strong of documentation or a strong a source as you wanted. So those are the bad things. Let's talk about the good source. Uses specifics. It has a date range, a geographical location, material composition, measurements, and context of the discovery. So that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, is it based on or is it inspired by? Is it inspired by finds from there, or is it based on a specific find? If it's not specific, it's usually simplified, and therefore it is probably more of an inspiration by what people have read and interpreted. So are there any questions on that before we go on? Or is there anything anybody would like to add to the discussion on that?
Actually, I have a little bit to add to that
Please do.
for the traceability aspect. We know in the past people have forged things, um, and I'm talking like oh, I need something. Prominent people would forge work to make themselves look better, and then that becomes part of the common record. And it's not till decades later that we realize, oh, this person rebuilt Stonehenge, or that the guy that put together the skeletons in England in 1800s. So you almost have to look at the person that wrote it and make sure that they're not associated with any known controversies currently going on to make you suspicious of it. So that's the world we live in.
That is the world we live in. The archaeology is always changing, and that's kind of the beauty of it. So, Aslak, sorry, I missed your question. I didn't see the chat. He says, so performers, there's nothing but secondary sources, question mark. No way to see the original performance. I have the original book, but that's the magician explaining how to do the magic. That one's a tough one. I personally, I can't answer that question, and I'm sorry that I don't have the knowledge to answer that. Is there anybody else that could expand on that question?
I don't have like the answer, but I have thoughts about it.
That's fine. Add to the discussion. It's totally good.
I would say that because it is the performer. If the source is the performer writing about their own experience or their own methods, that gets it a little bit closer than if it is biographical or written from the perspective of somebody of a witness or an audience member or somebody who heard about it, as is often the case with historical um, reference materials. If it is a firsthand source, I would say that's a little more reliable.
Yes,
I don't know if it constitutes um, a primary source, but it's better.
it's definitely better. Especially if multiple performers were doing some very similar things. I think that would make it more fundamental, or less being able to be challenged or something along those lines. So let's talk about moving forward. Let's talk, or I guess I should ask Aslak, does that answer your question? Okay, we'll come. I'll watch for the chat. So, three. Let's talk about context. Context. Artifacts without context can be very misleading. So when you're looking at an artifact, especially in today's society or today's world, as Andrew was talking about, we can be misled by what people have found or what people make up with the power of ChatGPT. I've seen a boatload of Roman artifacts that were found fully intact, and they were like, oh, but then they quickly realized that it was uh, AI making these images hyper realistic, and they're not even close to remotely what was found. So you have to ask yourself, where was it found? Was it in a grave, in a river, a military camp, in a trade center? Um, and ask and try to find the numbers or the relevance between those things, those finds. Um, the context of these things changes. You can change your interpretation. A sword in a wealthy grave may tell a different story than a broken one in a river deposit. A good source explains the context of history. So we'll take, what is it, to the Burka grave. I want to say 157, but I'm not entirely sure. They found a sword, an axe, and I believe, SAX. and the skeleton of the person. And there's a lot of speculation on it, whether this person was male or female. And through copious amounts of studies and people looking at it and refining it, it actually started to prove that at least one one grave was found with a woman with a sword. So that kind of broadened the horizons of of what we believe in the Viking era. Of Again, I'm kind of speculating here, but this is my opinion of how many men versus women were, we'll say, quote unquote, warriors or fighters. But this is starting to branch out and show us that that isn't that all men were only, or all the warriors and all the fighters were only men. That is some evidence that's starting to point to say that, hey, not in this grave at least. So understanding where it was and what it had in the grave, it kind of changes the context, like I said, versus the countless swords that they found in countless rivers. Who knows? Maybe it was dropped by so and so. Maybe it was, or like taking it to the Illarapadal bog, or those various different bogs that those damn barbarians took Roman swords and just threw them in there as a sacrifice to the gods. And thankfully, they're bogs and they didn't have a lot of oxygen in the bottom, so we were able to find these swords that were pretty well preserved. Understanding that they were there, that they were sacrificed, kind of tells us what they were doing and their belief system. So again, it just adds to the flavor of your SCA. And a good source will explain that. It will explain the context, and a weak one will just show you pictures. It won't give you that fundamental history. Um, and going further, we're going to talk about author credibility. That does not mean they're famous. It means, what is their background? Is this person somebody that studies your particular craft day to day? Do they have a extensive education on it? Are they trained in that field? Are they cited by other researchers? Have they published consistently? Uh, Examples of weapons studies for me would be archaeologists publishing excavation reports, researchers who reference museum colleges or catalogs, excuse me, or they are people that have went there, as we've talked about, and looked at these things, held them in their hands, took measurements, drew them out on a piece of paper and provide them to us. Or are they scholars who show drawings, measurements, and metallurgic analysis? So metallurgic analysis is when they take like little chunks of the metal and test it for carbon content, slag content, and so on and so forth. So we fully understand like the difference between the different pattern welds. Like the middle of the sword is usually a lower carbon, and then the outer edges are higher carbon. And they do that to show us, this is how they did it. And even that being said, though, even these experts can be wrong, because it's an ever-changing thing. Archaeology is constantly evolving, constantly moving forward, and as new evidence is found, it starts to change what we fundamentally thought was true into what we're believing now. But that being said, experts who show evidence are still stronger than anonymous blogs, such as Wikipedia. So this is very important, is peer review and cross-checking. A strong claim should appear to in more than one serious source. So one thing I like to do when I'm going through my documentation is I like to look at the sources, obviously, and then it's might be a bad hobby, but I start reading one source, and then I'm like, I wonder what these sources are. And then I go find that source, and then I start reading that one. And then I'm like, then I branch off and go find another one, and then I branch out and I kind of just constantly weave all over. And then before I know it, I'm 30 different sources away from the original one. But it's good in a way because then it shows me the trail of where of all the aligning um, evidence for the item that I'm trying to recreate. So it should be, like I said, it should be in more than one serious source. So if I see the same information that has been confirmed in 2 to 3 independent academic sources, the confidence increases, which kind of takes us back to Aslak's question is if I can only find secondary sources because I obviously can't go back in time in the Wayback Machine to this performance and see how they did it. If I can find multiple sources that confirm that, yes, this is how they did it, and they're all the same, then that kind of gives me a better confidence in what I'm trying to recreate. So if I only see it in blogs on Pinterest or social media, I'm probably not really going to put my heart and soul into it and put it into my documentation. I'm going to read it, see what they have to say, and see if I can relate it to what other things I found. Um, but it's not confirmation. It's yeah, it's not confirmation. So just kind of take that into consideration when you see Facebook blogs and stuff. If they're not um, lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. If they're not displaying pictures of what was found and they cite where they found it, again, kind of getting repetitive here, then it's something that I'm probably gonna read and note, and then be like, hey, that's pretty cool, and then probably move on. I'm not going to make sure that it's in my documentation as the next best thing. Um, So let's talk about transparency and uncertainty. But I guess before I go into that, are there any questions before I move on? So anything to add to the discussion as well? Cool. Keep on keeping on. So transparency and uncertainty. I fall into that category a lot. I think we all can fall into that category a lot. It's a big one. Good historians, good archaeologists, masters in their craft will admit uncertainty. They will say evidence suggests. They will say things like evidence suggests. There's a debate. The interpretation remains contested. So there's also going to be, well, this historian said this, well, this historian interpreted this way, and they're butting heads. Um, there are no absolutes in our history or in our sourcing. There are the and weak and personally, I think weak sources deal in absolutes. I think there's like a Jedi saying or something like that, or a Sith saying or something like that. History, personally, to me, is rarely absolute. A prime example is the Pugio knife, which was very common in the early Roman days, and there is strong evidence that they found the Pugio dagger in and near the areas of the Rhine. Um, it seems like every statue, every find, no, I shouldn't say every, but 99% of the statues and the finds that they found, usually they also found Pugios in legionary camps and legionary graves, and like in any of the battle sites that they've found Pugios. However, it even though it is a very highly decorated weapon in the Roman military, they have not found very strong. They found pieces and bits and pieces of it found in areas like Egypt. Um, does that necessarily mean that the legions that were stationed in Egypt or Africa didn't have Pugios? Not necessarily is what I'm getting at. One historian could argue that no, they didn't because they were never found, and another historian could say, well, we found bits and pieces, and the the weather, the atmosphere, the whatever, however you want to call that, in Egypt is a lot harsher on archaeology than it is per se in the Rhine. So that's what I'm talking about in history deals in absolutes. Like there's evidence that shows that in books and things that were written about Romans that the Pugio was a military oh my gosh, I can't think of the word now. It was a standard issue weapon. Um, but that being said, they couldn't find anything from the legions that were stationed in Egypt. So you got to kind of take ebbs and flows. If you speak with total certainty about complex topics, be cautious, especially in a room full of laurels. Somebody eventually is going to be able to call you out and tell you something, their interpretation that is going to be entirely different than your interpretation. So don't deal in absolutes. Um, so we've already touched base on this, but we're going to go into primary versus secondary versus tertiary sources. So the primary is the object itself, the manuscript or the excavation record. Secondary is the academic analysis of said artifact and scholarly books and articles about the object. Tertiary are the summaries, blog posts, videos, and various websites that you can find on these objects. If you're just starting out and you don't know where to begin, tertiary sources are useful for starting points. They will hopefully they can lead you to the bigger sources that you're looking for, the secondary sources, and then even the primary sources of the object you're trying to get to. The goal is to always try to climb towards the primary object or the primary material of said object. So try to make that happen. We're getting ready to go over the hour. I'm sorry, uh, but we'll just keep going until everybody's tired. So we already talked about weak signs of a weak source. So we'll just quickly touch base on that. Just be cautious as you're going through your sources. If there's no citations, no dates, no locations, no artifacts, um, they're doing very overly dramatic claims, modern moralizing about the past, and very open, strong statements like everyone knows this or all evidence suggests, so on and so forth. Those are very red flags about your sources. So so how do you know if something is likely true? Um, if two sources say different things, how do you decide which one to believe? Anybody can answer that if they want to.
I think that's where it's important to start diving into those sources and understanding what informed those opinions and those decisions, and then trying to validate that through other sources.
Yes, exactly. So I like to call it the cross-check test. Truth in history strengthens when it appears independently. Um, so you ask yourself, is this claim supported in more than one serious source? Are those sources independent of each other? And it's important to have a distinction. Three blog posts repeating the claim is not three academic sources. That is one idea echoed three times. So a stronger one would be the excavation report, the academic book, or the journal article. or even better, the museum find, or those references back to said museum find. If multiple scholars are working independently, come to similar conclusions, confidence is should be increased, especially in those things. Number two is the evidence weight test. So you should ask yourself, is this based on a physical artifact? Is it based on chemical analysis? Is it based on written records? Or is it based on interpretation of artwork? Because not all evidence is equal. That kind of goes back to Her Grace Cortland's is it a painting? Now, if you're a painter, it's perfect. But if you're somebody making garb based off an interpretation of the painting, then it's not as good as the actual object. It's still good, but it's not as good as the actual object. So physical evidence generally carries more weight than artistic interpretation. An excavated sword with a metallurgic testing is stronger evidence in a medieval than a medieval painting of a sword. Paintings can exaggerate, and artifacts do not lie. They can be misinterpreted, but they exist. And if you are strong-willed enough and you ask enough people, you can find the actual objects. So it's kind of, again, we're kind of repeating ourselves. You're always going to want to go back to your primary source. Prefer the material evidence when it's possible. So that kind of leads us further along into the can I defend this? This is a practical for Kingdom A&S. Ask yourself, if a Laurel asks, why did you do it this way? Or not even a Laurel, just anybody asks why you did it why did you do it this way? Can you point to the evidence? Not say, I saw it online, but because artifact X shows this construction, this is why I did it that way. I may have used modern methods, but this is how they would have done it. If you cannot defend it, then it's not strong enough yet, and you should continue your research. Now, that being said, it's okay if you are not there yet. And you can say that. Just be open and honest about that. For example, he asked that question. I didn't have the answer. So I open it up to everybody else that probably does have the answer. And that's okay. There's no harm in not knowing something. Not saying you don't know something is better than making something up. So that being said, we're going to go into a couple common research traps that lead to potential bad assumptions. What is a common historical fact that you later found out was wrong? This is open to the group.
Maybe the Monopoly monocle?
What do you mean by the Monopoly monocle, like the glasses?
Yeah, the monocle that
Okay.
he wears in the game. I remember the monocle existing, but apparently it never actually existed. A whole bunch of people just remember it wrong.
Okay. All right, that's fair. That could be something that we thought was a fact that was in fact wrong. So most bad history does not come from laziness. It comes from shortcuts. So not actually looking at the Monopoly game and studying the case and the Monopoly guy on said case, or studying the history of the Monopoly guy and understanding that he never really had a monocle. That would be an example of bad studying. So another example is the Pinterest trap. It's a pretty picture, but there's no citation. It looks medieval. It looks historically accurate. So we assume that it is. It looks like it's from a book. It looks like it's from something. The problem is that there's no artifact number. Usually there's no artifact number. There's no date. There's no location, and often modern reproductions are labeled as historical. Um, so you need to be careful of that, especially in. I've noticed that there are a lot of knife makers that claim that this knife is from this period, and I recreated it based on this, and it's completely, totally, like totally wrong. So a good example would be search a modern Saix and then search up an Anglo-Saxon Saix from the early 900s. You will see two very distinctly different knives, and that's another example. So I made my first Saix because I thought the modern ones they came straight, and then they have that very like pronounced, well, it's almost like a 45-degree angle down to the tip, and the blade is very straight, and it's not a very pretty knife at all. But if you look at an actual Saix, I have it on me actually, it it has a steeper slope, and then the actual blade itself is curved. It has a belly here, and then instead of being straight, it also slants down into the hilt. It comes smaller. The modern interpretation that you see a lot of is everything is very straight, and there's no belly, there's no elegance to it. So that would be another example. So if you cannot trace the image back to a museum, an excavation, or a manuscript reference, it's an inspiration, not evidence. And again, Pinterest is a great starting point, but it's not proof. It should help you go down the rabbit hole. That is never ending. Oh. Repetition equals trap number 2 is repetition equals truth. You see the same claim repeated everywhere: blogs, Facebook groups, SCA handouts, and YouTube. So that must mean it's true, right? Well, not necessarily. Many myths survive because people copy each other. Example would be horned Viking helmets. Obviously, there are no actual horned Viking helmets, but a lot of people believe there are because somebody made a movie with horned Viking helmets once upon a time, and bada bing, here we are. 20-pound medieval swords. I think somebody made a post today. Museum Artifacts made a post today about some giant ass great sword that they said was made for a distinct person that was like 7'2", 500 pounds or something like that. And a lot of people got on there and said there's actually no evidence that this sword was made for that person. These swords were made more as decoration. And so that's another prime example. Pattern welding, another example is pattern welding was only decorative. It was decorative, but it also had to do with social status and the integrity of the sword. Repetition is not verification. So when you see these things, ask yourself, where did the claim start? And if you cannot find the origin, be very cautious of it. Trap number 3 is single source syndrome. You read one book, it sounds convincing, and you stop there. The problem is no historian is neutral. No book covers everything. They just can't. That's especially in my line of work. It's actually very hard to find. It's easy to find documentation. It's easy to find pictures of swords and stuff like that. But all the experts that I've been able to talk to, they all say the same thing. If you can actually go there and see the object, that's the best thing you can do, because it's all interpretation, and then you can actually interpret what you are seeing and what you're wanting to recreate. So cross-checking, going back to cross-checking, it prevents that. It prevents overgeneralization, outdated interpretations, and that personal bias. So one source can inform you, multiple sources strengthen you. So always try to maintain finding multiple sources. Any questions so far? Anything to add to the conversation? Cool. the last trap
I
I'm gonna.
think the only
Oh,
thing
go
I would
ahead.
add to that, Attilius, is I think part of what brings all of us into arts and sciences and the joy of recreating these things is we enjoy studying and we enjoy history. So be curious, right? If you don't know the answer to something, be curious enough to find it, right? And that involves digging deeper. That involves putting on your archaeological hat and going and digging around in the artifacts that are there, in the interpretations of other people, and then ask questions. The arts community in the SCA is deep and wide with lots of disciplines, lots of access to historic research and their own interpretations. If you don't know the answer to something, don't be embarrassed. Ask, talk to people, strike up conversations. You'd be surprised at how many people are actually also interested in those answers or have already done research or can at least point you in the right direction.
Absolutely, 100% agreed. Um, Duke Sean, actually, when I first started taking my training seriously, not to go into fighting, but I was doing the 5 method show during COVID, and I was hesitant because I was afraid to ask for help. And Sean's like, dude, just ask. And before I knew it, I've had a laundry list of Dukes that wanted to be on the show during COVID. And at the end of it, he's like, hey, and just think about it. All you had to do was ask, and you got all this information. So 99.9% of the time in the SCA specific, everybody wants to help each other. Now, that being said, if you seek out experts and actual archaeologists, or people that do this for a living, some of them will be assholes, because that's how they make their bread and butter. They don't want to delve. They don't want to share their. They don't want to share their secrets, and that because that's how they make their money. So be careful. Some people may shut you down when you reach out to them. So trap. The last trap that I'm going to go into is romanticizing the past. We like heroic narratives. Uh, they're fun to read. They're exciting. They're cool. Um, they were the master craftsmen of unmatched skill. Like even at the beginning of this class, I mentioned that. I even romanticized it. These guys did this day in, day out. In the wintertime, that's all they had to do because it was cold, it was miserable, so they just honed their craft. It's their version of Netflix and chill without the chill part. Everything was handmade perfectly. It was beautiful. It was ornate. Um, and they had the secret to lost techniques. Um, but in reality, variations exist, mistakes exist, and quality ranges from crude to elite. Um, I was one of those people that chased perfection, and I realized that by chasing perfection, I lost beauty in my creations. It's the subtle little things that you mismatched, or your your one line kind of bees off, or you ground a little bit too far on this, that add to the beauty and to the handmade. If you don't want to hand make something, um, buy it from a manufacturer that can just punch them out of a sheet or something like that. Um, Archaeology shows human inconsistency. It do not let romance override the evidence, and do not try to chase that romantic perfection. Yes, they were extremely talented, and yes, I would say they were damn close to being perfect with what they had and the tools that they had. But again, it took them, they started when they were kids up until they died. This is what they did. So be careful with that. So we're going to close out with a simple system for starting or fixing an ANS project. So how many of you start building first and then research later?
I will neither confirm nor deny that.
Yeah, okay. So most hands went up. And if they didn't go up, I'm sorry, you're a liar. And we've all done it. That's normal. But there's a better order, and we all know that too. So define your scope clearly. This is the foundation. Don't say Viking, don't say Roman, don't say medieval. That's very broad. It's almost too broad. Like Roman is the span of close to 2,000 years or more. Viking spans also equal to that. And it's when you think Viking, you're talking about multiple countries, multiple generations of people. And medieval obviously just encompasses it all. It's too broad. So you want to funnel that focus. I would instead say ninth century Norway or first century Roman auxiliary dagger, Pugio, or a 14th century English garment. And I bet you even some of those could be even too broad, but it's funneling your focus into something. It's funneling it into a specific time, a specific place. And if that is still too vague, your research will be vague. If your scope is narrow, your evidence becomes stronger and it's actually easier to find. Step number 2, find one real example of what you want to make. Before you build anything, just find the object. Find one documented artifact. Look for the museum listing, like we've mentioned, the excavation report, academic publications, artifact numbers, measurements, and clear dating on the object. If you cannot trace it to a real object, you need to pause for a moment, and this step will alone eliminate most of your bad assumptions. I'm not going to go into it further. We've already kind of preached it till it's a dead horse, so just be cautious of it. Step number 3, find 2 to 3 serious discussions. Ask, has anybody studied this object? Look for academic books, journal articles, museum catalogs, and researchers who reference excavation data. Your goal is not quantity, your goal is not quantity. Your goal is confirmation to confirm that what you're wanting to make is actually from the 14th century or whatever century you're looking for. If multiple serious sources describe similar features, confidence increases. You should be more confident in your ability or in the ability or your sources. If they disagree, note it, and that's okay. Extract the data, not just the ideas. Most beginners read passively. Instead, pull specific information, dimensions, weight, materials, construction methods, if they have them, decoration, and context of the discovery. Going back to the Burka grave, those contexts matter. Write down page numbers, take notes. This becomes your documentation backbone. Step number 5, what is known from what is not? Ask yourself, what do we know for certain? What is debated? What is unknown? For example, a known would be the blade length, the material composition, and the find location. The unknown would be kind of going back to Aslak's thing. I don't know. I can't go back and watch these guys forge these blades. So forging exact sequence, symbolic meaning, and original finish. The original finish in some cases because of rust and material breakdown. Do your best to not fill in the unknowns with imagination, and that is extremely hard. So going back to His Grace Ronin, if you don't know something, don't be afraid to ask people. It's good to ask, especially in the unknowns, because their interpretation, they may have found something or they may have something that you can't find, and they have that one super book that literally has everything in it, and they can tell you or whatever, vice versa. You can be that person to somebody else. That's also very important. Um, make informed decisions based on those things. Make honest choices. When you build, be clear. This feature is directly supported by this evidence from this find from XYZ123 grave. This feature is based on a scholarly interpretation by Dr. I'm superior and expert in your chosen craft. This feature is a modern compromise for safety or cost. So that for me as a blacksmith, like I said, a prime example for me would be a 12-ton press. I'm sorry, I don't have 3 or 4 guys or apprentices out in my shop. Like jokingly, I said, my sons are going to be out there soon. They're not going to be swinging an 8-pound sledge for quite a while to hand forge out a sword. I'm going to use the press. It's safer, and I don't want to spend the next 4 months forging a sword by hand and take time away from my family. Document it, note it in your documentation, why you did it, why you made the compromise, how they did it, and move on. The judges will respect your honesty. You may be docked, but they will respect your honesty. And remember, claiming certainty where none exists can weaken your your documentation. So, and it weakens you as a scholar in training or an aspiring scholar and an aspiring artist. So, be ready to defend it. So, ask yourself before you submit. If someone asks, "Why did you do it that way?" Can you answer with "because X artifact shows this," or "because researcher Y argues this"? If your answer is anything along the lines of, "Well, I just saw it online," you're not quite there yet, and you need to research more. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Being honest about it, though you will be docked a little bit, is okay. That's how we grow and how we learn. So some fixes, some quick fixes. If someone's already built something, you don't need to scrap it. Instead, narrow your scope retroactively, find a similar object, compare your work to the evidence, and adjust your documentation honestly. And truthfully, if somebody else makes the same thing you did, that's freaking dope, because then you guys can come together and be like, how did you do that? Oh, well, I did this. And then you guys can grow and become better together. Um, improvement is always better than defensiveness. So, as we close, you do not need a PhD. You do need some discipline. Narrow your focus and trace your evidence. Be honest about your choices and the things you may not know. That alone will put you ahead of most beginner projects. So, if there's any questions, now's the time, or if you have anything to add to the discussion. But this is the end. So.
Thanks for hosting, Corey.
Yes, sir. Just so everybody knows, this will be posted on YouTube probably tomorrow at some time. So if you want to come back to it, I also have a file. I don't know if you can find it. I tried to upload it to the Zoom. I'm new to Zoom. I haven't used Zoom since 2020, since COVID. If you want a copy of it, you can reach out to me on Facebook, and I can get you a copy of an outline of everything we talked about. So that being said, this class wasn't designed, or I didn't do this to it isn't about turning you into historians. It's about helping you avoid avoidable mistakes. And documentation is very intense and very intimidating. It is for me, especially. I struggle with it. I struggle with reading and comprehension and retainment of it. So I find myself reading over and over and over and over again. Um, so remember, we are students. We're not experts. I'm not an expert. None of us here are archaeologists running excavations, unless somebody is that I don't know. But we are participants in a historical society. That means we have a responsibility to be honest about what we know and what we don't know. Be honest about um, everything that we do and be prepared to improve over time. It takes a long, long time. Um, there's a Latin phrase, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's essentially it says, life is short, but art is long. So remember that. Art takes a long time. So be forgiving of yourself, be forgiving of your shortfalls, be forgiving of the things that you may not know yet. But where you were yesterday compared to where you are today should always be improving, at least by 1%. And if you don't improve by that 1%, it's okay. Um, it's all about intellectual honesty and not perfection. So, uh, I had a weightlifting coach. This will be the last quote I give you guys. He's like, sometimes when you're trying to reach your goal, no matter what it is, it's like moving a giant pile of dirt from point A to point B. And sometimes you have an excavator and sometimes you have a spoon. But as long as you're moving the pile every day, you're going to reach your goals. So, with that being said, thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed the class. You can submit it into the Artemisia, academic Artemisia, or whatever it is. Sorry, drawing a brain fart. I'm a little fried right now. It's yeah, and you can get credits for learning, and it helps me as a teacher as well. So, that being said, see you guys on the next one. Yeah, the university. Thank you. Artemisian University. You can find it on the main webpage. So, and like I said, I'll put this up on YouTube soon. If you guys have questions outside of class, don't hesitate to reach out. But until then, thanks.
Thank you, Attilius.
Yep,
Thank you
of
very
course.
much. Appreciate it.